Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at absolute value inequalities. And the part that's going to be different from this than the last time is that it's going to be inequalities, but also on all of these we're going to be graphing. So because we're going to be using this organizer, I'm actually going to solve the inequality in one of them and graph in the second. So that as we go through, you're not trying to jam everything into one of them. It might make it a little bit easier going back to look at your notes. So first of all, we're going to start with one of the organizers. And in the middle, I'm going to label this solving absolute value inequalities and graphing. So the graphing part is really going to be different for us here. And also it's an inequality. So what that kind of looks like looks a little different as well. Okay, I'm going to go find my first spot to start with, and we're going to talk about some big ideas. So because we're going to talk about inequalities, there's a couple things with inequalities that you need to remember. When I go to graph, if I have less than or greater than, the circle I'm going to use is going to be opened. If it's less than or equal to, or if it's greater than or equal to, if it has the equal to part with it, the circle that I have is going to be filled in or solid. Okay, one of the other things that people tend to forget with inequalities is that if you multiply or divide by a negative number, then you're going to have to flip your inequality. And you're going to see a few of those today. Now, because we have this absolute value, we are going to do kind of the two branches at a certain point. But I want to make sure that you're kind of paying attention to those big ideas as we go. Okay, now I'm going to move over. And when I start to do this for number one, I'm going to solve it in one of these circles. And then I'm going to graph it in the one next to it. So when you get done, you should have number one solved and number one graphed next to each other. Okay, so here's the one I'm going to solve. So absolute value of x minus 2 is greater than 3. So we're going to start by separating these two because when I start at the very beginning, this absolute value is already by itself. So one time through, it's going to be positive 3. I'm going to do my OR. Here's the part that can go tricky. The next time through, it's going to change to a negative 3. But when we switch it to negative 3, we're also going to flip the sign. So this here, both of them kind of get flipped. So this becomes the other direction, and 3 becomes negative 3. And now I'm going to solve it just like I did in the other ones. So if I start out here to get x alone, the opposite of subtracting 2 is adding 2. So I have x is greater than 5, and I'm going to bring my OR down. Now the good news is the first step here is still going to be the first step here. So I'm going to add 2. And I get negative 1. So these two inequalities, hang on, I'm just trying to make that a little better, are the ones that I'm going to graph. So actually, I'm just going to bring them to the graph part so I can see it. So I have x is greater than 5. Or, oh, might help if I got an x there. X is less than negative 1. So when I'm looking at these, the only two numbers they seem to care about are negative 1 and 5. So when I make a number line down here to graph on, I have to make sure those numbers are on there. Now, if I wanted to, are there a lot more numbers in between here I could do? You bet. I could do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But I have to have these two numbers because they're the numbers that they refer to. So both of those inequalities do not have an equal to with them. So when I go to graph, they are going to be open circles. So let's start with this first one. So this tells me because there's no equal to, there's going to be an open circle at 5. Now normally when I graph, I do it above the line. So I have an open circle there. As long as the letter comes first, this points the way the line's going to go. So my line's going to go this way. Now your line should go at least as long as the line is here. It should cover the whole thing. Now, when you read this, it's read the x values that are greater than 5. So the x values that are greater than 5 would be down here. Now, if we go to this one, again, it's going to be an open circle at -1. And because x comes first, this points the way the line's going to go. So that means my line goes this way. So that means the x values that are less than -1, which would be here. Now here's the deal. My answer could be here or it could be here. So on these lines, you really have two possibilities that could happen. They could each run off the opposite ends of the lines, or they're going to overlap and you're going to have an overlapping spot. So you can see on this one how they both go the opposite ends of the line. Now, I know for some of you it may be weird that I draw above this, but here, just listen to my reasoning. It's easy to see this lines up with 5. It's easy to see if it's opened or if it's filled in. It's kind of hard to see that if you're writing on the number line at the same time. So that might be something to consider as you go through. Okay, now on the front, I have done the big ideas and I've done one graph and one solve. So I have 2 spots left on the front of this. And now I'm going to go, this is number 2. And I'm going to solve in one spot and graph on the one next to it. Same thing I did in the last one. So my absolute value is the absolute value of x plus 2 minus 3 is less than or equal to -1. Okay, to be able to solve this, I need to get the absolute value by itself. So I'm going to have to move this first. So the opposite of subtracting 3 is adding 3. So I have the absolute value of x plus 2 is less than or equal to, and then -1 plus 3 is going to be positive 2. Now my absolute value is alone. So now I can split them. So x plus 2 is less than or equal to. So all I do is drop the absolute value bars and write it exactly the way it is. When I do my OR, the inequality's got to flip, and the positive 2 on the other side becomes -2. And then I'm going to solve. So to get x by itself, the opposite of adding 2 is subtracting 2. So I end up with 0. Guess I made that line a little too long. And the thing is, the same step here is going to be the first step here. So subtract 2. Get x is greater than or equal to -4. So those are my 2 inequalities. So to graph, I'm going to bring those to that next circle just so I have them there. Okay, so to graph, the only numbers they seem to care about here are 0 and -4. So make sure you put them on the number line where they would go. So -4 would have to go somewhere on this end, and 0 would have to go somewhere on that end. Don't just put them down the order that they appear here. Put them down in how they would appear on the number line in the right places. Now, on this one, because they have an equal to with both of them, that circle that you're going to take is going to be a filled in or a solid line or a solid circle. So we're going to start with this first one. So I know it's going to be a filled in circle at 0. And they want to know where everything is less than or equal to. So it's got to go this way. Now, once I see it's going by the other number we already have, I have a big thought that they're probably going to overlap. Because remember, we talked about the two possibilities are to go off the opposite ends of the line in the opposite directions or to overlap. And this kind of gives me an idea that maybe overlap is going to happen because of where it's going. So when I do this next one, I'm actually going to do it underneath the number line. So -4 has that closed circle or filled in circle. They want to know where the x values that are greater than or equal to -4 are at. So it's going to have to go this way. Now remember, your lines that you're making, they should go at least as long as that number line is. So make sure they do. Otherwise, when you go to see things that are overlapping, you won't see them. So this is the way it works. This, I'm going to bring down to the number line. This one, I'm going to bring here. And what they share is this line in between. Now, listen, if you were to look for the answer for this one, the answer would be the part that's in green, the overlapping part. If you were to see this in our test or a quiz, they're not going to show you this part. They're only going to show you this. So you've got to be able to draw it yourself and know how that's going to act. Okay, now we're going to flip over to the back. We have 2 more to look at on the back. So on the back, I'm going to do number 3. Just like I did before, I'm going to do a solve and a graph. Now, by the time we're done, we're going to have filled in all of the boxes in the front and back except for one. Okay, so here is number 3. Absolute value of 5x minus 2 plus 1 is greater than or equal to 4. Okay, to be able to solve these, we're going to have to get the absolute value by itself. So I've got to get rid of this first. So the opposite of adding 1 is subtracting 1. So I have the absolute value of 5x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 3. Now I'm going to go through and separate these because I have the absolute value by itself. So 5x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 3. Written just the way it is, I just dropped the absolute value bars. After the or, I'm going to flip the inequality, and positive 3 becomes negative 3. And then I'm going to work to get x by itself. So we got to get rid of this first. So the opposite of subtracting 2 is adding 2. So I have 5x is greater than 5. And then to get x alone, I would divide by 5. So I have x is greater than or equal to 1. Now I'm going to go through and do the same thing over here. Now listen, the adding 2 and dividing by 5 is going to be the same steps I'm going to have in this one. So I'm going to add 2. So I have 5x is less than or equal to negative 1. I'm going to divide by 5. Now, honestly, I know I could take negative 1/5 and I could make it a fraction or a decimal, but I'll probably just leave it as a fraction. It's probably easy enough to use that way. Okay, so those are my 2. I'm going to bring that down here. So to graph, I know I've got to have negative 1/5, and I've got to have positive 1. Now, I know by looking at these that these both have equal to with them. So I know when I go to graph that my circle is going to have to be filled in or solid. Start by graphing this first one. So it's going to be a closed circle at 1, and this tells me that it's got to go this way. You noticed I've been filling in like these arrows here? That lets the person who's looking at my graph know that you know it's got to keep going. Okay, now if I go to look at the other one, oops. That means that it's going to be a solid circle at negative 1/5. Did you notice how I could already tell that this is going to go the opposite direction so I can make them both above? So you can kind of see they're going to go the opposite directions. Okay, now listen, when they're looking for the answer, they're going to look for this, and they're going to look for the graph. Okay, let's go to our last one that we're going to do. So I'm going to have a number 4 that I'm going to solve, and a number 4 that I'm going to have to graph. So I have absolute value of 2x plus 3 plus 1 is greater than 6. So if I look at this, I've got to get my absolute value alone. So I got to get rid of this. So the opposite of adding 1 is subtracting 1. So I have the absolute value of 2x plus 3 is greater than 5. Now that I have the absolute value alone, I'm going to go ahead and split it. So 2x plus 3 is greater than 5. Just writing the equation or the inequality that's there, just drop the absolute value bars. Second time through, flip the sign of the inequality and flip positive 5 to negative 5. And now we've got some solving to do. So to get x alone, I got to get rid of this 3 first. So I'm going to subtract 3. So I have 2x is greater than 2. I'm going to divide by 2. X is greater than 1. Now, this subtracting 3 and dividing by 2 is going to be the same thing that happens over here. So I'm going to subtract 3. So I have 2x is less than negative 2 and divide by 2. X is less than negative 4. Okay, now I'm going to bring that down to my graphing area. So the two numbers they care about are negative 4 and 1. Again, if you want to put more on there than that, knock yourself out, but you have to at least have those. I know with both of these, it's going to be an open circle because there's no equal to with it. So if I start with this, open circle at 1, and my line's going to go in this direction. With this one, open circle at negative 4, and my line is going to go that way. So I can tell automatically these are going to run off the ends, the opposite areas off the ends of the lines. Okay, we'll try a few more of these in class together.